Welcome, everybody, to the session of Iowa Ideas. This is the second session of the Human and Social Services track. My name is Emily Anderson. I'm a reporter for the Gazette, and I am the track lead for the Human and Social Services session, and I will be moderating this session. We are here to talk about food insecurity in Iowa. So to start off, we want to just acknowledge our sponsors for the Iowa Ideas. It's a free conference, and we're really glad to be able to put that on with the help of our sponsors. So we want to shout out Tanager Place and ITC Midwest for their help with putting on this conference. And then let's get started. So my name's Emily Anderson, and then I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves, and I'll let them kind of give a little bit of background for why they're connected to food insecurity, what they're kind of doing here, and then we can get going. We're glad to have you all here. So Nikki, do you want to start us off?
Oh, sure. Yes, I am Nikki Ross. I'm the executive director at Table to Table Food Distribution Network in Johnson County. And I've been working in this space for about 19 years in various organizations, and Table to Table provides about half or a little bit more of all the food distributed by our pantry and meal site partners in Johnson County. And we've seen quite a bit of change in the food insecurity landscape in the last several years.
Awesome, thanks. Jasmine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Jasmine Brookshe-Day. I am the Director for Healthy Incentives at Iowa Healthy Estate Initiative. We are located out of Des Moines, Iowa, but for my job, I am the manager of the Double Up Food Bucks program, which is a health incentive program that helps to bring fresh fruits and produce, veggies, plant-producing produce to SNAP users. So we have about 56 counties that we serve, over 90 sites that include our Fairway Hy-Vee locations, CSAs, farm stands, farmers markets.
Awesome, thanks. And Ryan.
Hi, Ryan Bopst, Executive Director of the North Liberty Community Pantry. And unfortunately, we have seen a dramatic increase in the rise of food insecurity at our pantry. We serve residents of North Liberty and rural Johnson County, and we doubled the amount of food we distributed in just 2 years' time. So definitely seen an increase, particularly since the COVID pandemic.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate it. For our audience members, we're going to be chatting about the change in the last few years and what we want to see going forward as far as what the state of food insecurity is in Iowa at the moment. We have questions I have a set of questions that we'll be going over, but we'll kind of jump around, see where the conversation takes us. And we'll also be taking questions from the audience throughout the session. So if you have anything you want to ask these panelists, just that I think in the chat, or there's a way to do it through Whova, and someone will be feeding me those questions so that we can kind of chat about what people want to hear. So start off, let's do just a general overview, whoever wants to kind of jump in, but tell me about the work that you guys do in food insecurity. How has it evolved in the last 5 to 10 years in Iowa? What's the state of things right now?
I guess I'll start. We hadn't talked about that. We haven't decided who was going to go first. I've been working at Table to Table for the last 7, so a good chunk of that 10-year history you're looking for. And I think that, and one of the things we're going to talk about is like how things have changed in terms of models and how we distribute food. I think that's one of the big things that we're seeing a change in response to some of the flooding and other natural disasters that happened 10 to 15 years ago, or a little bit longer. We saw a change in how many and the types of food services that were provided. And so those have expanded over the last 10 years. But then more recently, we saw year to year an increase of between 5 and 15% of the rate of food insecurity. And now that has gone up significantly in the last 3 or 4 years, which is pretty unprecedented in the sense that type of growth in that short of a period of time. And so despite the fact that I think that food insecurity services have changed and improved in a lot of ways, the systems are really not set up to respond to that kind of change in that short of an amount of time.
Absolutely. Now, Brian, you kind of briefly mentioned before the COVID-19 pandemic and how that sort of shifted things a little bit. Can you go a little bit more into that and what, I guess, how that plays into that change that we've seen?
Sure. So we regularly survey our families for what their needs are and to do program improvement. But what we learned was in 2019, before the COVID pandemic really started, about 20% of the families we served said we were providing 50% or more of their food for their household in a week. So a majority of households we were serving in 2019 and before were really using the pantry as a supplemental source of food, not the primary source of food. Unfortunately, just in this year, in 2024, we now have seen a big switch in 82% of families that we serve now say they get a majority of their food from the pantry for their household each week. So that's a pretty significant switch in terms of no longer becoming a supplemental resource to help families make it through the end of the month until the next month starts, but rather because of the cost of food and the cost of everything else that has gone up over the last several years just dramatically has caused people to shop with us that have never accessed food pantries before. So not only are we serving or distributing more food, but we're also serving more families than ever before.
Yeah, gotcha. Jasmine, I know you don't work as directly with food pantries, but you've got kind of a different system where you're helping with the healthier, ensuring that they've got healthy options. What have you seen change in the last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I that predates me. I've been in this role as my second year. And so things that we've kind of been talking with our sites and some of our users that do call in or we are able to survey, we see a shrinkage in SNAP users. So part of how Double Up Food Bucks works is that you have to be on SNAP and utilize your SNAP benefits. So when you use your SNAP benefits to purchase any fresh produce or plants that produce produce, including seeds, we match you up to $10 per day. We have about a few sites, such as like LSI here in Des Moines, where because of how their farmers market functions, they get to match up to $250. So because of those things, we're seeing folks really getting excited about the program because they're often informing us that they don't get a lot of SNAP benefits. And so they heavily rely on it, particularly if they are elderly or are on disability. They heavily rely on our program to get the fruits and vegetables that they need because they know food is medicine. I often also talk to people who are not in counties or, in driving distance of one of our sites, feeling very frustrated that we cannot open up a site to participate. And so just having, that kind of knowledge and awareness of the need, and just seeing how people are very vocal about wanting to eat healthy, wanting to have options, wanting to have um, an ability to have their own food the way that they want to feed their families and those types of things we're seeing. Just challenges that people are facing regarding those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned a couple of the challenges, but what other strains have we seen? I know, especially this year, it seems that there's been a large increase in people relying on those food pantries, relying on the work that you guys do. What are the strains that are being put in people's lives that's causing that kind of, where's that increase coming from?
I mean, I can start. One thing is, for folks that are they're lacking income, sustainable income. So having employment is a huge thing. You're seeing I just see, I do other work in the community and there's a heavily reliance. Families are enlarged in size because now they're having to rely on each other for finances, and that puts a lot of strain if there's only one source of income in the household. And I think there's this misconception about how easy it is to apply for benefits because those things are changing often. Social services is as much as we have a lot of resources in the state, I think there's a lot of opportunity to fill those gaps, but there is also stigma, particularly around utilizing SNAP benefits at grocery stores. People don't know that they can use their SNAP benefits at farmers markets. It's just a lot of unknowns and lack of knowledge. And I think with our program, what we struggle with the most is marketing, getting people to be aware of what the program is, how to use it. We have changed since I believe we started in 2016. And we have implemented the program digitally now. So I think that that puts barriers on folks that may not have um, quality phone or internet service. And so, particularly for our vendors, having them use the digital arm, they do see challenges with Wi-Fi. So there's a lot of like overlap things that people don't think has some impact on food security that we don't often talk about.
I
Yeah.
think that's really, sorry, I was just going to share. I think you bring up a really good point that we know 62% of the families that we serve have a working adult in the household, and another 18% are either retired or physically disabled and unable to work. So we're talking about a super majority of families we serve have working households. And so I think there is a case to be made for underemployment and for the lack of wages to keep up. And then on top of that, I think some of the assistance that's available with regard to SNAP benefits, we've had families really struggle through the application process only to find out that they're eligible for $23 a month. And that makes it really difficult to consider. And then they feel a little overwhelmed about, is it even worth it, that's not even going to pay for a meal almost for their household, let alone get them through the month. So I think it's this combination of the increased costs that families are facing, not just with food, which is 28% higher today than it was before the pandemic started, but also the cost of housing, which is even higher than it was, and utilities, and just all the stressors that families face. So food pantries definitely are seeing families rely on them more to meet those needs for food, so that other areas in their life and in their checkbooks can be spent, that money can be spent elsewhere.
Yep, all of that true, and just related to the cost of housing. A lot of folks on who are here for this listening, that rent eats first, and so utility and rent is always going to be paid before folks are going to use their money for food, because there are a lot of ways you can cut costs with food. They're often not the skipping meals and lack of nutrition and that kind of thing. Are factors that happen when there's just not enough money to go around.
Yeah, gotcha. How do you guys see that, just those financial changes in the last few years affecting you from the other end of things as nonprofits? What do you see as far as funding? Are you seeing less volunteers because people have less time, or what's the impact on the other side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can share from our experience. I think we, as with everyone else, experienced, at least initially, a dip in volunteers during the pandemic. That, certainly there were risk factors, and before a vaccine was available, a lot of concern about safety, which is understandable. I think that we've rebounded from that and are seeing volunteers coming out that know food security is a priority for them, and that they want to see their neighbors have more access to food and greater food security. So they're doing what they can. And we've actually seen a growth in volunteers just in the last couple of years, which has been really great. I think because the cost of food is greater today, when we have to purchase food because it's not available through other sources, that costs more. So we're thankful that we've seen an increase in donations and grant funds available. And at the same time, it's not enough to keep up with the demand that we're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, our partners in Johnson County purchased 250,000 pounds more food last year than they did the previous year. So when Ryan says that they're serving, double the amount of food, that's why. It's largely because it's being purchased, so that strains budgets. Sustainable funding is one thing, and we do have some sources of that. But when you're seeing an increase in visits and people that you're serving, the costs just increase also. It means you may need to be open more hours. It means you have to buy more food. It means you do need more volunteers. And yeah, volunteers haven't been a huge issue for us, but maintaining staffing, being able to pay our staff and have staffing levels to meet this greater need. And we don't serve the public directly, but we do food rescue, so we collect food that's available, that's good to eat, nutritious, and we're just looking for more sources all the time. So we rescued 500,000 pounds more this year than we did the previous year. So add that all together, that's like 750,000 pounds of food more that's available in Johnson County. And some organizations are still sending folks home with fewer pounds per visit. And that is all largely due to the budget. Also related to our budget and operational costs, to collect that 500,000 pounds more, it took more resources because we've exhausted all of the easy things and all of the less costly things. And we do focus on produce, protein, dairy, those really high need things, but they cost more to recover.
Yeah, definitely.
I would echo sustainability. So with our program, we do not receive any state funding. Our program is managed and financed through the USDA grants that we apply for. And then we rely on local in-kind donations and such to match. So it is a match grant. So as we think about sites that we are bringing on every year, as we think about expanding to other locations. Particularly, we're going to be focusing on independent grocery stores in areas that may not have a Hy-Vee Fairway type of setup. And so having to, do, projections about what does this look like sustainability wise, because we don't want to turn on a site and then have to turn it off because now we've maxed out our dollars for that year. We also think about the technology that it takes, the staffing, all those other like key components that the folks on this call have said as well, and really helping to find new innovative ways. And so we're looking at developing a food navigator program where we can help bring in those volunteers, bring in those knowledge holders, those social service individuals that are in these communities to help bring folks to the program, help sign them up, help engage with them. Because I don't like using the word healthy foods because like what is healthy food? But really helping to give people options and more knowledge about cooking, storing, cleaning, sourcing their foods. And help building opportunities for people to just have better options versus the one thing that they only have access to because that's the only store I can go to and everything they sell are boxed foods. Nothing's wrong with eating, right? We need people to eat, but then also having those high nutritious valued foods are so important as we know that our state is rising in obesity, which can lead to other chronic illnesses. So I think it just creates a triple effect, a trickle down effect of just even impacting healthcare in some of these communities where we're not able to feed them, let alone feed them high nutritious valued food.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a whole other discussion, isn't it? Just the difference between having food available and having food that's good for you and nutritious and regularly having those fresh fruits and vegetables and kinds of things. We have a question that popped up in the chat here, kind of a grouping of questions, but looking more at legislative stuff. It says, I'm wondering how the legislation signed into law, which changed the SNAP application process, impacted Iowans. What can Iowans do to bring this issue to the attention of legislators and the governor? And then there are concerns that changes proposed in the Farm Bill to the Thrifty Food Plan may hurt SNAP recipients. What can Iowans do to share these concerns? So just generally speaking, what are your guys' thoughts on kind of SNAP stuff that's going on at the moment and some of that legislation that we've seen and some of the new stuff that's been proposed on how that's going to impact the people that you serve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we're unfortunately seeing kind of the brunt of that. Again, more families are accessing pantries today than before because of some of these changes. And for example, over the summer, this is something we haven't brought up yet, but summer EBT or what is now Sunbucks that our state opted out of. We at the North Liberty Community Pantry broke a record each month this summer, and we attribute that primarily to kids being out of school and not having access to the additional assistance that they previously did. I think one of the most important things that people can do is educate themselves about what's happening, and that's where volunteers can talk with families that we serve, and that you can actually see firsthand how those decisions impact a household. That we can talk about 245,000 kids no longer have access to those benefits in Iowa, but that could be really abstract when you get to see that family walk through our door and how it has been difficult and how they have struggled and that they once had this resource and now it's gone. It's just devastating for so many households. So I think it's educating yourself and raising awareness then, and turning around and looking at resources like the Iowa Hunger Coalition is an organization that is advocating for some of these policy changes that make things easier for families and that provide additional support to families in Iowa. And looking at their talking points and policy positions, and they share research that goes along with those aspects about the benefits of various programs that they're advocating for. And then turning around and talking to your locally elected officials, so those state representatives and state senators that cover your area, and having conversations with them and say, this is important to me, and this is how it's affecting your constituents, and I care about this. And I think the other thing that I would say that gives me hope is that the state of Nebraska changed their course, that they originally also planned to opt out of Sunbucks summer EBT. And when the governor had a chance, the governor of Nebraska had a chance to talk with families that would be directly impacted by that decision, he changed his mind and opted back into that federal program where dollars were available. So I think those are some pieces that I would consider.
I think you covered most of it, Ryan. Great, great summary. I just will second, if you have an opportunity to sign up for the Iowa Hunger Coalition newsletter, they do just some of these things are so complex, and the way they're put forward in legislation doesn't always, isn't really clear what the impacts will be. And often when they're presented, it's presented as, oh, this is a fiscally responsible thing to do, or, oh, this is a policy or a procedure we have to put in place for application that's going to reduce misuse of SNAP benefits and that kind of thing. And the truth is, and go to the Iowa Hunger Coalition's website to get the specific stats on this, but misuse of SNAP benefits and other things like that is just not an issue. And often these implementation of these sorts of restrictions or additional requirements in the application process, the cost of doing that is far more than any potential misuse that's even currently happening. And so Jasmine mentioned that the SNAP use has gone down. That's another thing that can be really misleading. When you think about SNAP use going down, you think, oh, that means there aren't folks that need the resources, and that just couldn't be further from the truth. The process is difficult. When they get through the whole thing, there's the $23 I think that Ryan mentioned is like a minimum that you can get, and or is like the, that's like the smallest dollar amount, and that's for a lot of families, that's what they qualify for. And if we all think about that, right? Like when you're going to do something that's going to be financially beneficial for you or your family, you're going to think about the time and the effort that it takes to put into getting that resource. And on top of that, the shame and the other things that come with SNAP benefits use, there's going to be a dollar amount that just doesn't make that worth it. There's going to be process roadblocks that doesn't make that worth it. And you can really understand that. And I hate always to hear, the sentiment of, well, if they really needed it, they would apply for it. And that's not reality, because it's hard to do and it takes a lot of effort. And if it's done online and they don't have the resources, I mean, again, you just have to think about the actual cost to families and what is happening here.
You all took the words right out of my mouth.
Absolutely. With those limitations that come with the SNAP, kind of the regulations around that, are there any, and I believe I've heard about this, but I'm not totally sure, but are there limitations as well on the kind of food that you can buy with that money? So you're getting $23, and are there limitations on where you can even spend that play into, I would imagine would play into especially that nutrition insecurity element of it? Is that something that you see come up?
Well, I can talk from our end. So, Double Up Food Bucks has three big key components. One of them is about increasing the economic, impact of our farmers in the state, which I think folks look past because we focus a lot on SNAP usage and SNAP users. But to bring this money back into our state is a big key component of the program. And so, um, particularly for our new sites that have never worked with bringing SNAP benefits to their store or their farmers market, it is very pricey. It can be very challenging if they are not, going through the state and getting some of that onboarding and support. And so again, we try and do our best to kind of inform people about like what they can project to as far as cost to keep up that machine that they're having to use and access to Wi-Fi. Some of our sites have had to invest in better Wi-Fi, which we know costs more money. And so I think not only just looking at our users, but the impact of some of our smaller locations that may not have the financial stability to, incorporate some of those things as well. So then you're seeing a low option of, folks that are able to shop with their SNAP benefits and only going to certain places because it is very costly to keep for a lot of our smaller areas.
Jasmine, that's a really great point, and that's something that we've seen. Unfortunately, we've had families reach out to us from well outside of our service area that are looking for assistance because there's just nothing within 30 miles, 50 miles plus, and I know it's worse the more rural you get. So when you're talking about, right, families might have to drive potentially 2 hours to get to a location where they can actually utilize the benefit they've received, feels pretty unreasonable.
Yeah. And, Emily, one of the pieces you talked about was the nutrition aspect and Double Up Food Bucks, just for the type of food that is being offered and it's fresh and local food, often maybe has that opportunity. But I do like to push back a little bit on the sort of healthy and nutritious and restrictive kind of questions we get about how SNAP can be used, because I think that's we all like to have choice in what we do. We all do what we need to do for our families. And I won't speak on behalf of the other folks here, but honestly, it would be so much better if we just helped folks have the resources they need to purchase groceries. Think about how much money we invest in the pantries and meal sites and like all these things, when if we just gave people what they needed to purchase groceries at their local places, first of all, those rural grocery stores might be more profitable because people are actually purchasing food there and not trying to meet their needs elsewhere. And also, there's just a lot of resources put into the pantries, and we just need to let folks choose for themselves the foods that they want, and we need to make it easier to choose the foods that fit their family's nutritional needs. And so our current systems just aren't set up for that. But restricting what folks can purchase with SNAP benefits, and yes, that was proposed, and I believe it did not go through. And you want to talk about how folks can advocate? I believe that the advocacy around not agreeing to that when our state proposed that was successful, because that didn't come to fruition, and it wouldn't have done the thing that folks said it would. It would have just made things even harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of those kind of rural areas and the difficulty that some people have even reaching pantries or reaching places where they can access that food. I know recently in the past few years, especially here in Lynn County, we've seen a couple pantries close just in this last year, and I know across the state that's been a difficulty in that there are just less places that are able to keep up and to operate. What have you guys seen sort of as what's making the difference between those food nonprofits that are able to keep running and those that just haven't been able to keep up?
Yeah, that's really difficult, and it's very sad and devastating for those neighborhoods and communities that were served to have those pantries close. Food pantries have become, in the last few years, the safety net And so when that safety net is now removed, eliminated, we at the North Liberty Community Pantry have received lots of phone calls and folks showing up who come from Cedar Rapids looking for assistance because the pantry they used to shop at is now closed. I think that there are a lot of challenges. Each organization is unique in that way. And I can only speak from our standpoint, but looking at strong community engagement, having nearly 300 regular volunteers that help us do the work the way we want to do it. We want to provide families dignity and respect while they shop with us and have that choice and variety that we talked about. So there's a certain model that we try to employ and really invest in making sure we've got support around that. And then it's the collaborations for us that Table to Table is a critical partner for us that's able to source that rescued food so that we don't have to go out and do that. We can serve families that are in front of us and coming through our doors today and connect them to other resources and services. So trying to tap into that connection that exists and the collaboration that exists between pantries, food rescue organizations. HACAP is another food reservoir that is really a critical partner for us in combating food insecurity. And all of that rises to the top, and we happen to have some locally elected officials that are very supportive of the work that's being done, understand the issue. And when local cities and counties are investing in combating food insecurity, that also raises the bar and gives us a chance to really deploy some critical models to address food insecurity for our neighbors.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
It's interesting. So I, as a young person in my family growing up, we faced food insecurity. I grew up in a small town in Iowa, and we really, as Ryan has talked about, the ways that folks used to use food pantries, used our local church food pantry supplementally. And our church would drop a box of food on our doorstep one Sunday a month, and it didn't meet all the needs, but it did help. It did help some. When you want to talk about food pantries that can't keep operating, that have closed, it's because what is being asked of our, especially rural, I mean, of course, our bigger community food pantries are also feeling the pressure. It's just different from a financial perspective and a community support perspective, which is not to say that in rural communities there aren't folks who support the fact that there needs to be a pantry. It's a financial situation, and things are just different when you live in a small town. But I think about what if my community growing up could never support what the need is right now, that folks would get half or more of their groceries from your local pantry, which in a rural community is going to be your community center or your church or maybe the school, and they just can't support the type of resources that are currently needed. And it's in the business world, any demand in services would mean you would that would be profitable, and that would be how you grow. And in the nonprofit world and in the pantry world, it's the demand and services that have closed the pantries, and it's just because they just literally cannot keep up. They weren't designed for that type of service. And truly, with the state of things the way they are, that the old type of supplementary service, boxes of food and that kind of thing, just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the, I guess, what would a solution look like where people aren't relying on pantries in that way? How do we, I know that's kind of a large ask, but how do we look to the future and set something up so that it doesn't continue to just weigh down on these pantries that aren't designed to function the way that they're being forced to function now?
I think a lot of it comes back to what Jasmine and Nikki had shared about just providing more support to families to buy their own groceries. And that we do have, I think one thing that's really interesting to me is at kind of the heart of the COVID pandemic in late 2020, early 2021, after the passage of the CARES Act, and pretty much everyone with young kids got pandemic EBT cards, and there were additional SNAP benefits allocated on top of their regular allotment every month. We saw a decline in families accessing food pantries. And our numbers clearly show that there was a dip, that the roller coaster went down when they had that extra support. And I think that's evidence of a model that's successful, that when families had the resources they needed, they no longer needed to rely on a food pantry, they were able to sustain. And those are the anecdotal stories that we hear from families that are coming in that we're registering as new families today. They're like, I was able to make it for a long time, but those benefits ran out and I don't have any other place to go. And that's unfortunately what we're just seeing is when those benefits go away and when they're reduced or there are processes put in place that make it more burdensome or difficult to access those benefits, that food pantries just become that safety net.
Yeah, for
And
sure. Oh,
I
go
think
ahead.
for me, I'm like, I hear oftentimes, and I think Nikki spoke to this a little bit of like this idea that folks are going to abuse the system, this you know, large population of people are going to just take the money and do nothing with it. But I think really thinking about folks really are in need. They're needing housing assistance, they're needing utility assistance, they're needing transportation, they're needing childcare, they're needing food, right? Because we know when children aren't eating, they're not performing in schools, which is going to lead to them not being able to be successful later in life. We want them to, I mean, we're in a capitalist society. We want them to get jobs, right? We want them to perform. We want everyone to be, good members of society, air quotes. But really thinking about like a lot of this is derived from these limitations that we put on people, and wanting them to build up some resilience versus how about we remove the idea of like I need to, create resilience in people and more looking at it from a perspective of how could I give them the basic needs, right, that they have to be able to then see what they can become, how they can do things, how they can get support and knowing life is happening to people. I think I look around just in my small circle of friends, and life is lifing. That's what we talk about a lot of times. Things come up. We have health scares, we have losses in family, and then it's like, oh, we're supposed to just pick this back up type of thing. Um, Really eliminating the barriers that people have in order to take care of themselves is very, very important. And not putting on these ideas that there's going to be abuse or misuse. When you have what you need, you're not going to abuse, you're not going to misuse because you're getting the things that you need. This idea of overeating or taking more than you need. When you have the power of choice, you take what you need, right? And I think from what you all talked about during COVID and the numbers that we saw when we opened up every site during COVID, saw that same type of concept that people were able to actually get the things that they're needing and that earn and that redemption rate was huge. We saw really impacting folks' lives. I talk to a lot of our users quite often and they really want to just be able to take care of themselves and what turned in from 5-minute conversation to address an issue at a site to a whole 30-minute conversation about all the other things that are impacting them. I hear stories about my refrigerator isn't working anymore and it hasn't been working for quite some time. So now I have to eat molded food. Why is that what we are allowing people to sit in, right? Like I always ask that question, like what systems create these things when we talk about policy and structure. One thing that we're doing with Double Up Food Bucks is seeking state appropriation so that we can create the sustainability, so that we know when we have this many dollars, this is how many people we can serve, this is how much food we can put out there, this is how many farmers we can impact, this is how much economic value can come back into the state because of the match. So we're really trying to, find those different pathways, have those different conversations, and understand storytelling is so impactful. People don't think, oh, if I tell my legislator this story, they're not going to hear me. If they hear 20 of those stories, 5 of those stories, that's still enough for them to change their mind or to look at some of our policies and make those changes that are going to impact our families in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jasmine, I thought that was so, yeah, that's so apt. And the idea that really artificial hardship, which is, the barriers we put in place of folks who just need to have some basic needs met, that's not resilience building. For Jasmine's program to have an appropriation that they can count on is, that's the same for their program. That's going to make them more sustainable and resilient because they have something that they can count on. They can expand out to different sites, and instead of thinking, oh, we have something right now, nobody does that, right? If you have money right now, you're not going to go and buy something that you're committing to paying for the next 10 years if you don't know that you have a sustainable resource for those next 10 years. And the same goes for families. So to Jasmine's point about the systems level, that's important, and along with that comes pay. And I think one of the, obviously our rural communities are affected by that, like, a lot, and probably more than others, like that the pay just hasn't kept up with what costs are. And I don't know, Ryan, you said 60%, 63% of the folks that come to North Liberty have an adult working in the household. Like, that's a problem. That you have somebody working and you can't afford to buy food.
Right. And I really appreciate this conversation, and it just makes me think about a change that we recently made to lean into this idea of choice, and that we believe families have the right to self-determination, and when they can choose what they need for their specific family, they can be more successful. So to meet that, we took away all of our limits on food in May and allowed families to shop as if they're at a grocery store and fill up their cart. And that's exactly the message we gave, was we want you to take what you need for your family for the week, and then you can come back and do it again the next week. And we have not run out of food any differently than we normally have, but that shift has caused such gratitude among people that are really struggling. And particularly from an equitable standpoint, those larger households, when you've got a household of 6 or 8, a limit of like 1 frozen meat obviously is not even a meal, let alone something for a week. So allowing families the choice and option to take what they need for their specific household as needs change week to week is the capacity for them to go beyond survival mode. And that was something else Nikki mentioned early on, that is our experience too with families we serve, that there is often a lot of shame that families happen to bring with them when they come to a pantry. That in itself is a barrier, that we have so many people refer their friends, their family, their neighbors to us, and they always say, like, I wish I would have come sooner. And we wish that were the case too. Food is a basic human right, it's a basic human need. And so when people need it, we want to be there for them to support that. We don't want there to be shame associated with that. We want people to feel dignified as they come in and they're helping their family. That is the resilient aspect that exists. That's not something that should be taken for granted or that people should be ashamed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. What you mentioned about having people have more options to be able to just kind of shop for whatever it is they need, how does that play into especially the aspect of serving those who have more specific needs, whereas allergies or other health needs that they have, or people with cultural differences that tend to have kind of different approaches to food than what people who were born here in Iowa might have? What do you see as far as finding ways to accommodate those different needs for people who are just trying to feed their families, like you said?
Yeah, that actually is really enriching to see that. Right, the food box that Nikki mentioned getting was definitely a way of doing that and may have provided some staples. But if you consistently got something in that food box that no one in your family either liked or could eat for medical dietary reasons or for cultural reasons, then it's not only not helping the family, but it's wasting that food for another household that does want that item. So this allowed us to be more flexible and specific in meeting needs for each household so that they could choose what types of nutrition they wanted and they could meet their dietary needs. If somebody has diabetes, they can focus on specific items that are no sugar. If somebody has a gluten allergy, we have gluten-free options that are available that they can shop for. If a family happens to not eat pork, we have a variety of other protein options available so that they can have choice. And I think that's where the families that we are serving today that just feel so grateful to have that type of choice, where it is dignifying that they are meeting their family's needs, like they are shopping as if it's at a grocery store. It just happens to be at the North Liberty Community Pantry, but they're still meeting their family's needs. And having that variety and choice is really critical. And partners like HACAP and Table to Table are really critical for us to offer that. As Nikki mentioned, they're rescuing even more food so that we can offer more variety. And having that available consistently is a really critical piece. And that's something we're still trying to build on, but it's hard to have consistency when you're trying to catch up with the growing demand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Ryan, I think that you nailed all the big picture choice things and the difference between getting a box of food that you don't select and being able to grocery shop. My family had a circumstance about 15 years ago that we happened to be living in North Liberty, and I was familiar with using pantry, so we went to the North Liberty pantry to use it. We used the pantry for about 6 months, and I remember like having had that experience of the food box, and then walking in. And North Liberty Pantry is one of the first organizations in Johnson County that provided the choice model, and I'd never heard of it before, and I'd worked in social services already for several years at that time. And it was mind blowing to me and my family. We were like, wow, we get to pick. And also with this idea that with no limits, like my family was just two people. So we might even, sometimes when you put limits on stuff, folks are like, oh, I better take all that just so I have it, just to be, but I know I can come back again next week, that I knew that at that time. And it was just such a huge like mental shift for how to use the resource, how I felt about using the resource, that it operated like a grocery store. And things have changed even so much. I mean, what now, 14 years later, things have changed even more in the positive direction. And that's something that Table to Table really values. We work on equity allocation, and one of the things that we consider is, does the program offer a choice, either in the meals that's served or a grocery store model. It's so important, and it's something that we think about when we're looking for food sources. So one of our partners is United Natural Foods, and that is a distribution, a grocery distribution. They provide food, for example, to Whole Foods. So that's retail products. They have organic options. They have plant-based milks. They have gluten-free stuff. That's where our community gets a lot of those options for our pantries if Table to Table provides them. And it's so important. And what's really interesting is how those things get selected. And that's an important part of the food distribution model as well, which is that, folks at the North Liberty Pantry who are choosing what to provide, you have to think from the perspective of not just yourself and your own family. So even 7 or 8 years ago, when we would get some of that stuff on that truck, we had partners who'd be like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like, why would you ever want to eat gluten-free pancakes when you can have, and maybe they wouldn't take it because they didn't think it would go well, like at the pantry. But once we started thinking about our clients and our customers, it's what you do at a grocery store, right? You're going to offer anything that a customer is going to need or buy in the amounts that are needed. And so that has been an important and big shift, is like pantries thinking from a customer standpoint and treating the folks who go to a pantry like a customer.
Yeah, I definitely would echo Nikki and Ryan. I think from Double Up Food Bucks, so when you get your Double Up Food Bucks card, you use this at all of our sites. So with that power of choice, right, we're now reinforcing it with having the same practice when you go from a Fairway to a farmer's market to a CSA, right? And these dollars follow you. And it's reloadable. It's again easy to get with just your zip code and using your SNAP card. And I would say it also reduces, waste, people being able to choose what fruits and vegetables they have. We're looking at sites that we visit to bring onto the program. We're also talking about diversifying the options for cultural foods, okra and all those things that we don't naturally see growing in the state we saw were growing in our Cedar Rapids area. So really helping to hone in on some of those farmers that may not know, like, hey, you can join this program. We can help get you set up and bring more of these food options to our families. And when we talk to some of our partners here in even Des Moines, like what does it mean to work with independent stores, corner stores? They have their own culture and value and systems. And so how are we helping to engage them as we help bring them new customers? Because that's the key piece of it is, again, helping people have choice of where they can shop, how they can shop, and helping to expand their dollars while they're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we're getting kind of close to ending here. Looks like we've got about 7 minutes left. So we'll go for sort of the larger ending questions here, unless we get any more from audience members at this point. But we talked a little bit about already kind of what that long-term solution looks like and just helping people to be able to afford things for themselves, kind of helping to reduce that stress on different families. But what would you, I guess, want to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years in the future? We talked about what has happened in the past. So what would you guys like to see as far as moving forward to improve things here in Iowa? And then, well, we'll start with that. And then if we need another kind of ending question, we'll pull something else. But is there anything that comes to mind immediately for kind of what you want to see going into the future?
I mean, I can start selfishly, would love to see our program grow, that we're in all 99 counties, right? That we help to support the folks that we're, that need it, that are on SNAP benefits, and helping to just see a strong way of educating people. I'm big on, I love food. Food is a big cultural piece for me. I'm a transplant to Iowa. My family's from Belize. And so food is life for me, and I know that it can be for other people. And so helping folks feel like they know how to do all the things. We joke about like cooking isn't being passed down anymore because we're just on the go practices. We're fast fooders. We're quick, easy 5-minute meal, quick fixes, but really going back to the core of what, was helpful and healthy for a lot of our families is being at that table, sitting down, having a quality meal, enjoying our food, not just eating it, but truly enjoying our food is so crucial to our mental health, to the health of our cells and our bodies and our spirits oftentimes. And I would hope that we have, no need for services, that folks really get what they need and are able to navigate the systems as life is changing. Because I know social services will always be needed because we're always going to have a need. But really finding that sweet spot to where people get what they need, and then when they need more, that there's no barriers to, access it, that they're not having to jump through all these hoops to get the services and support that they need to take care of their families.
I think
That was really, go ahead, Nikki.
sorry. I would like to see our state commit to the programs that are already available. So the things that are offered. And so that means not just in the case of double up food bucks, not just accepting that we're going to take the federal dollars, but we're going to match them with state dollars, or we're going to use state dollars to extend the capacity of those programs and really make them solidly available. And I want us to try that because I think that the evidence of how those programs will be used will show us how effective that is, and it's a really good start. And then beyond just the food access specific things, I think we should also be trialing universal basic income and other things that are going to help us think about poverty and access to basic needs differently, in addition, of course, to an increased minimum wage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, those are all really good things. I personally would like to see the state move away from starvation as a policy solution to obesity and hunger. And that, right, investing in programs that already exist and accessing funds that are already available are great places to start. And I think there are lots of examples in other states that have found ways to work with great partners and make food more accessible. So there are plenty of states today that offer free lunch for all kids in school. I think that would be something that we should pursue. I think raising the minimum SNAP benefit for households is an important step. And participating in Sunbucks in 2025 is definitely a priority for a lot of the families that we serve, but also the Iowa Hunger Coalition. And I think getting back to something Jasmine said, that just really kind of changing the relationship that our culture and our society here in Iowa has around food, that food is not just a commodity, it's so much more than that. And it's an essential need, and it can bring people together. And I think investing in programs and services that do that are really important steps to bringing that to fruition.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you tuning in for this session, and thank you to our audience members for coming to listen and contributing some questions, and to our panelists, of course, for the thoughts you were able to share. I think this has been a productive conversation, and I hope we're able to see kind of some of those changes and that growth that we've talked about in the state in the coming years. So just throw out there for our audience members, if you want to tune in for our future sessions. We've got the next session in the Human and Social Services track today is at 11:45. It's called Innovating When Restricted by Policy, and it's a discussion of kind of how nonprofits can work to create solutions when they do run into those policy problems that we've talked about a little bit here and in some of the other sessions today. So tune into that and to the rest of our sessions today. We're glad to have you all here, and thank you. I think we're at time.